At the family dinner, my daughter-in-law pointed a finger at me and shouted, "The help is going to eat in the kitchen." I simply smiled and replied, "That's fine, sweetie, and you are going to live on the street." In that instant, she discovered that I was the owner of the house. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment from what city you are watching from. That way I can see how far my story has reached."
I'm Grace.
I'm 63 years old and I thought I had lived through enough betrayals in my life to recognize them from a mile away. I was wrong. The most painful betrayal came disguised as a family invitation in the sweet voice of my son, Michael, asking me to come for dinner. "Mom, it's been a while since we all got together. Tiffany's making something special," he had said on the phone that afternoon. His voice sounded different, tense, like when he was a little boy and had done something wrong, but didn't know how to confess. I should have paid attention to that sign. I dressed with care that evening. I chose my navy blue dress, the one that always made me feel elegant, and put on the pearl earrings my late husband, Richard, gave me for our 20th anniversary. I wanted to look my best for my family. What an irony. When I arrived at the house, a sprawling brick colonial in the affluent Chicago suburb of Hinsdale, I immediately noticed several cars parked outside. One, the Petersons' silver Mercedes, the Millers' black BMW, Jessica Coleman's red Lexus, all names I knew from Tiffany's social circle. My stomach tightened slightly, but I told myself it was probably just a dinner party with friends where I was included. Tiffany opened the door before I could even ring the bell. She looked impeccable as always, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her designer dress that likely cost more than many people's monthly salary, and that smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Grace," she greeted me. And right there I should have noticed something. Not mom, not mother-in-law, just my name, pronounced with that calculated coldness she mastered so well. "So glad you could make it.
Come in."
The sound of conversation and laughter filled the living room. I recognized the voices immediately. Brenda Peterson talking about her latest trip to Europe. Jennifer Miller commenting on the new collection at her art gallery. Jessica Coleman laughing at something that sounded forced and rehearsed. Michael came over to greet me. My son, who was once my best friend, now hugged me with the stiffness of a stranger performing a social duty. "Hi, Mom," he murmured near my ear. But there was no warmth in his voice, only obligation. "Michael, honey, it's so good to see you," I replied, trying to ignore the feeling that something was terribly wrong. His eyes avoided mine. Tiffany cleared her throat in that theatrical way she had of commanding attention. "Well, now that we're all here, we can move into the dining room." I started toward the group, hoping someone would include me in their conversation, but the looks I received were strange. Not hostile exactly, but uncomfortable, as if my presence were an unplanned interruption. "Grace." Tiffany's voice cut through the air like a sharp knife. I stopped and turned to her. She was standing by the entrance to the dining room with that posture she adopted when she felt in absolute control of a situation. "I think there's been a small misunderstanding." The silence that followed was deafening. All conversations stopped. I could feel the eyes of every guest on me, as if I were the center of some spectacle I didn't understand. "A misunderstanding?" I asked, my voice sounding smaller than I would have liked. Tiffany smiled, but there was nothing kind in it. It was the smile of someone who was about to enjoy what she was going to say next. "Well, it's just that this is a dinner for my special guests, for people on our social level." She paused, savoring each word. "I think you'd be more comfortable eating in the kitchen." I felt as if I had been physically struck. The air left my lungs, and for a moment, I couldn't process what I had just heard. My own daughter-in-law was exiling me to the kitchen as if I were hired help. I looked at Michael, waiting silently, begging him to say something to defend me, to remind his wife who I was. But my son, the boy who once promised to always protect me, simply stared down at the floor. "The help is going to eat in the kitchen," Tiffany added. And this time there was no mistaking the venom in her voice. The words echoed in my ears like a funeral gong. The humiliation was so complete, so unexpected that for a moment I was paralyzed. I could see the expressions on the guests' faces. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, as if they were witnessing an entertaining drama. Brenda Peterson even exchanged a knowing look with Jennifer Miller. In that moment I felt something inside me break. It wasn't my heart that had been fractured so many times over the years that it had learned to function with the cracks. It was something deeper. It was the last emotional connection I had to the idea that this family valued me, that my place in this world meant something to the people I loved most. But then something strange happened. Instead of crying, instead of screaming or running out in humiliation, I felt a cold calm descend over me. A calm I hadn't experienced in years. It was as if I had been waiting for this moment without knowing it. As if the clarity I needed had finally arrived. I smiled, a genuine, quiet smile that took Tiffany completely by surprise. "That's fine, sweetie," I said, my voice surprisingly serene. "You're right. I think it's time we all knew exactly where each of us belongs in this house." The confusion on Tiffany's face was instant. That was not the reaction she expected. She had expected tears, please. Humiliation. Instead, there was a 63-year-old woman smiling at her with a confidence she hadn't shown in years. "And you know what, Tiffany?" I continued, feeling each word come out with crystal clarity. "Very soon, you are going to find out exactly who really belongs here." The silence that followed was different from the last one. This time it was heavy with a promise that no one in that room fully understood except for me. But what none of them knew was that this humiliation this evening they had planned so carefully to put me in my place, had just become the catalyst for something that would change everything forever. That night as I drove back to my apartment, memories flooded my mind like waves during a storm. Tiffany's humiliation hadn't been an isolated event. It had been the culmination of 5 years of systematic contempt. 5 years of being treated like an inconvenience in my own son's life. It all started when Michael met Tiffany at a real estate conference. He worked as a real estate agent, an honest but modest job. She was the daughter of a property developer, accustomed to a world of luxury that Michael only knew from a distance. From the first day he introduced her to me, I knew there was something in her eyes when she looked at me. It wasn't respect. It was an assessment, as if she were calculating my value and had concluded I had none. At first, the comments were subtle. "You live in a small apartment, Grace. How cozy." Or, "It's interesting how some people can live with so little space." Always with that perfect smile. Always in a tone that sounded sympathetic but cut like a hidden knife. When they got married 3 years ago, I had hoped things would improve. I thought maybe Tiffany had been nervous trying to impress, and that once she felt secure in the family, she would warm up to me. How naive I was. The first Christmas as a married family was telling. We had agreed to celebrate at the house Michael and Tiffany had bought after the wedding, a beautiful colonial home in Hinsdale that I had secretly helped finance. Tiffany had insisted that everyone bring a specific dish for dinner. "Grace, you can bring the napkins," she had told me on the phone, while my sister, Susan, was asked to bring the turkey and Aunt Catherine was tasked with dessert. Napkins, as if my contribution to the family celebration was so insignificant that I only deserved to bring paper. But what hurt most that Christmas wasn't the napkins. It was when it came time for gifts. Michael and Tiffany had taken great care in wrapping beautiful presents for everyone there. Everyone except for me. My gift was a box of cheap chocolates they had clearly bought at the last minute from a drugstore. "We just didn't know what you like," Tiffany explained with that fake sweetness I was beginning to recognize. A lie. I had been present at every birthday, every family celebration for Michael's 35 years of life. They knew my tastes perfectly well. The months that followed were a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Tiffany had a special talent for making comments that sounded innocent on the surface, but were loaded with poison. "Grace, that coat is so vintage on you. I suppose it's from when it was in style." "Oh, it's admirable how you maintain such a positive attitude despite your limitations." But the most painful part was watching how Michael changed. My son, who once called me 3 times a week, suddenly only communicated with me when Tiffany wasn't around. Our conversations became superficial, careful, as if he were walking on eggshells. One day about a year ago, I went to visit them unannounced. I needed to drop off some documents Michael had forgotten at my apartment. When I arrived, I heard raised voices coming from the study. I approached quietly, not to eavesdrop, but because I recognized the tone of anguish in my son's voice. "I can't keep doing this, Tiffany," Michael was saying. "She's my mother." "Exactly," she replied, her voice cold as ice. "She's your mother, not mine. And frankly, Michael, her constant presence is affecting our social life. People talk, they wonder why we have to put up with that. But she helped me when I needed money for college. She paid for my first apartment when I started working. And now you have to pay her back for the rest of your life? Tiffany interrupted. Michael, my love, you have to understand something. In my social circle, the way you treat your family reflects your status. And having a mother-in-law who shows up unannounced, who dresses like she's living in the 1980s, who can't hold a sophisticated conversation. It's embarrassing. There was a long silence. Then Michael's voice weaker. What do you want me to do? Just create some distance. You don't have to cut her off completely. Just keep the visits to a minimum when we have important guests. Maybe it would be better if she wasn't there. That was the conversation that marked the beginning of the systematic distancing. Suddenly, invitations to family dinners came less frequently. Birthdays were celebrated with just a small family gathering, which apparently didn't include me. The phone calls became even scarcer, but I was still there waiting. I kept sending gifts on special occasions. I kept calling to ask how they were. I kept making discreet deposits into Michael's account when I knew things were tight financially because that's what mothers do. We love unconditionally even when we aren't loved in return. What Tiffany didn't know, what none of them knew, was that during all these years of rejection and humiliation, I had been making very important decisions about my future. Decisions I had kept private, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. Richard, my late husband, had been a very smart man when it came to money. During our 30 years of marriage, he had invested wisely, bought properties, and built a quiet empire that very few knew about. When he died 4 years ago, he left me not only his love and memories, but also a considerable fortune and a real estate portfolio that included, well, many things that certain people would kill to know about. After that Christmas of the napkins, after hearing that conversation in the study, after every venomous comment and every calculated exclusion, I had begun to make certain legal arrangements, certain changes to important documents, certain moves that would ensure that when the right time came, the truth would be revealed in the most impactful way possible. That night, after the humiliation in the dining room, as I took off the pearl earrings Richard had given me, I knew that moment had arrived. Tiffany had played all her cards. She had shown her true nature in front of witnesses. She had crossed the final line. Now it was my turn to play, and I had a winning hand she never saw coming. The days following the dining room humiliation passed in a strange silence. Michael didn't call, which didn't surprise me. Tiffany had probably forbidden him from contacting me until I reflected on my behavior. But I wasn't waiting for their calls. I was busy doing other things. On Monday morning, I had an appointment with my lawyer, Marcus Wellington. Marcus had been a partner at Richard's law firm for years, and after my husband's death, he had become something of my guardian of financial secrets. His office in the financial district always put me at ease. With its perfectly organized law books and the smell of fresh coffee. Grace? Marcus greeted me as he reviewed a stack of documents on his desk. The changes you requested last week are all processed. Are you sure you want to proceed with this? I nodded firmly. Completely sure, Marcus. It's time. I had made the decision to transfer certain properties that I had kept under Richard's name to my maiden name, Grace Romano. This included the house where Michael and Tiffany currently lived, which they believed they had bought with a conventional mortgage. What they didn't know was that I had been the one to provide the entire down payment, and had been discreetly paying a significant portion of the monthly payments for the last 3 years. The process should be complete in 2 weeks, Marcus explained. After that, legally, you will be recognized as the sole owner of the residence in Hinsdale, as well as the condo in downtown Chicago, and the commercial property in Naperville. Meanwhile, Tiffany was living her moment of glory. Through my network of social contacts, which was far more extensive than she imagined, reports of her conversations at the tennis club, at her charity luncheons, at neighborhood parties trickled back to me. She was telling her version of the dinner incident, painting herself as the victim of a difficult and demanding mother-in-law. I had to be firm with her, she had told Brenda Peterson during their Pilates class. Sometimes older people need to be reminded of appropriate boundaries. Brenda told me this during our lunch on Wednesday, probably expecting me to react with outrage. Instead, I just smiled and changed the subject. What Tiffany didn't know was that Brenda Peterson and I had known each other for over 20 years. Her husband, Charles, had been Richard's client on multiple real estate deals. Brenda knew perfectly well who I was and what my true financial situation was, but she had chosen to say nothing, waiting to see how this play would unfold. On Thursday, Tiffany made her first significant mistake. Michael called me, sounding nervous and confused. "Mom," he said, "something strange is happening. Tiffany got a call from the property management office where we live. They said they need to update some documents, something about the true owners, but we bought this house. We have the contract." "And what kind of documents, Michael?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "I don't know exactly. Tiffany spoke with them. She said it was probably just some bureaucratic error, but she looked worried." That Friday, Tiffany's anxiety intensified when the mailman delivered a certified letter addressed to the current occupants of the property. The letter, which had been sent by Marcus Law Firm, was technically a routine notification about changes in ownership structure. But to someone with Tiffany's guilty mind, it sounded ominous. According to what Michael told me later, Tiffany spent the entire weekend making frantic calls. She called her father, the family lawyer, even the real estate agent who had sold them the house. They all gave her the same answer. The documents seemed legitimate, but they would need to investigate further. On Sunday night, Michael showed up at my apartment unannounced. When I opened the door, I saw he had dark circles under his eyes and his hands were trembling slightly. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked. I let him in and made him tea, just like when he was a boy and would come to me with his problems. But this time was different. It was no longer my son confiding in me. It was a scared man searching for answers he didn't know how to ask for. "Tiffany is really stressed," he began, avoiding my gaze. "These letters about the house, the calls. She thinks maybe someone is trying to scam us." "Scam us?" I repeated, taking a sip of tea. "Yeah, like those schemes where people pretend to be the rightful owners to take people's houses." He rubbed his forehead. "But it's strange, Mom. I was looking through all our house documents today, and there are some things I don't understand." My heart began to beat faster. "What kind of things?" "Well, when we bought the house, I remember us taking out a loan for $800,000, but in the papers I have now, it shows we only owe $200,000. And there are these payments marked anonymous benefactor that have been covering part of the mortgage for years." Michael looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. Confusion mixed with the suspicion that there was something important he didn't know. "Mom," he said slowly, "do you know anything about this?" That was the question I had been waiting years for. The question that would mark the moment everything would change between us. I could see in his eyes that he was starting to connect dots he had deliberately ignored for a long time. I set my teacup on the table and looked at him directly. "Michael," I said softly, "did you ever wonder how a woman supposedly living on a small pension was able to help you with college, with your first apartment, with all those financial emergencies you had over the years?" His eyes widened slightly. "Mom, did you ever wonder why people like Brenda Peterson treat me with such respect when Tiffany insists I'm just an unimportant old woman?" Michael was quiet, but I could see his mind working furiously, reviewing years of small details he had ignored or misinterpreted. "Did you ever wonder," I continued, my voice growing firmer, "why when she humiliated me in front of her guests the other day, I didn't get angry or cry, but instead I smiled?" The expression on Michael's face changed from confusion to something like panic. "Mom, what are you trying to tell me?" I smiled, the same quiet smile I had given Tiffany that night in the dining room. "I'm telling you, my dear son, that very soon you and your wife are going to discover that you've been playing a game where you didn't know the real rules." Michael shot up, spilling his tea. "What does that mean, Mom? You're scaring me." "Don't be scared, Michael. Just be prepared, because what's going to happen next week is going to change everything you thought you knew about your family." When Michael left that night, I knew he would run straight to Tiffany and tell her about our conversation. I knew she would panic, make more desperate calls, and try to find some way to maintain control of the situation, but it was too late for that. The documents were signed, the legal processes were in motion, and the truth was about to come out in the most spectacular way possible. Tiffany had played her last card when she humiliated me at that dinner. Now it was my turn, and I held a royal flush she never imagined I could possess. The call came on a Tuesday morning. It was Michael, but from the tone of his voice, I knew immediately that Tiffany was beside him, likely telling him exactly what to say. "Mom, His voice sounded forced, rehearsed. Tiffany and I have been talking, and we think it's important to have a family conversation. An honest conversation about expectations. Expectations? I asked, though I already knew where this was going. Yes, about the future, about living arrangements. He paused, and I could hear whispering in the background. We want to invite you to dinner on Saturday, but this time will be different. It will be just family so we can talk openly. I see, I replied calmly. And who else will be present at this family conversation? Well, Tiffany thought it would be good to invite a few extended family members, so we're all on the same page about important things. There it was. Tiffany had learned nothing from our last interaction. Instead of pulling back her troops and reconsidering her strategy, she had decided to double down. She was going to try to humiliate me again, but this time with an even larger audience to serve as witnesses to my supposed final defeat. What kind of extended family members, Michael? Well, my cousin Kevin and his wife Sarah, Aunt Catherine, your sister Susan. Another pause. And also some of Tiffany's close friends. People we care about and whose opinions we value. Translation. Tiffany had assembled a jury of her allies to witness what she believed would be my final humiliation and permanent exile from the family. It sounds like a very special occasion, I said. May I ask what the specific purpose of this meeting is? Michael stammered, clearly reading from a script Tiffany had prepared. Well, we think it's time for everyone to understand our roles in the family. And maybe it's time we talked about more appropriate living arrangements for everyone. More appropriate living arrangements. I repeated the words slowly. Michael, are you telling me that your wife wants to use this dinner to tell me I should find somewhere else to live? That's not it, Mom, he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. It's just that, well, Tiffany has found some very nice communities for people your age, places where you could be more comfortable, where you'd have activities and where I would be out of the way. I finished for him. Mom, please don't look at it like that. We just want what's best for everyone. All right, Michael, I said, and I could hear his sigh of relief. I accept the invitation. I will be there on Saturday. Really? I mean, that's great. Tiffany will be so pleased. I'm sure she will, I murmured. Tell Tiffany I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to say. After I hung up, I sat in my favorite armchair and actually laughed for the first time in weeks. Tiffany was so certain of her position, so convinced she held all the power in this situation that she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life in front of an audience. I spent the next few days meticulously preparing for what I knew would be the defining moment. On Wednesday, I met with Marcus to review all the final documents. Everything was in order. The property titles had been officially transferred. The public records had been updated. Anyone who wanted to check the information could easily do so. On Thursday, I had lunch with Brenda Peterson. As I expected, she had already been invited to the Saturday dinner. Grace, she said as she picked at her salad. I hope you know I have no idea what Tiffany is planning, but Charles and I were asked to be there. Apparently, she told him it was important to have respectable witnesses for some kind of family announcement. Respectable witnesses? I repeated, amused. Yes, those were her exact words. Brenda looked at me curiously. Do you have any idea what this is all about? Oh, I have a very clear idea, I assured her. But I think it will be better as a surprise for everyone. On Friday night, Michael called me one last time. This time, his voice sounded less rehearsed and more genuinely worried. Mom, are you sure you want to do this? I mean, come tomorrow? Why shouldn't I want to go, Michael? It's just, well, Tiffany has been very stressed this week. These letters about the house, the legal documents, she doesn't understand. She's on edge. And you, Michael? How are you feeling? There was a long pause. Confused, he admitted finally. Mom, I feel like there are things happening that I don't understand. Tiffany says one thing, but when I look at the house documents, when I think about all the times you helped me financially, I don't know what to think. Maybe, I suggested gently, tomorrow night, you will have all the answers you need. What does that mean? It means it's time for the whole truth to come out, Michael. The whole truth. On Saturday evening, I arrived at exactly 7 o'clock. This time I had chosen my most elegant dress, the black Chanel that Richard had bought me for our 25th anniversary. I put on my finest jewelry, the pieces I saved for special occasions. If this was going to be a performance, I was going to make sure I looked the part. When Tiffany opened the door, her confident smile faltered for a moment. Clearly, she hadn't expected me to arrive dressed like someone who belonged in her social circle. "Grace," she greeted quickly, recovering her composure. "You look so elegant tonight." "Thank you, Tiffany. I thought for such an important occasion, I should dress appropriately." The dining room was full, just as I had anticipated. My sister Susan was sitting at one end, looking uncomfortable. Aunt Catherine was chatting nervously with Kevin and Sarah. Brenda Peterson was there along with two other couples I recognized from Tiffany's social circle. In total, there were 12 of us. Tiffany had set the scene like a stage play. She had even placed a chair slightly apart from the rest for me, as if I were the defendant in a trial. "Well," Tiffany announced once everyone was seated and appetizers had been served. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Michael and I wanted our loved ones to be present for a very important conversation about the future of our family." Michael shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with what was about to happen. "As many of you know," Tiffany continued, "we've been going through some family challenges recently, situations that have required us to make difficult but necessary decisions." She looked directly at me, her eyes glinting with the confidence of someone who believed victory was assured. "That is why we have decided it is time to make some changes to our family's living arrangements. Changes that will benefit everyone involved." The room was completely silent. I could see Susan looking at me with concern while Brenda Peterson wore a completely neutral expression, as if watching a play for which she already knew the ending. "Michael and I have found a beautiful senior living community very close to here where Grace will be able to live comfortably with people her own age and socioeconomic level." There it was. The public shaming she had been planning since the moment she humiliated me at the last dinner. But this time she wanted witnesses. She wanted the whole family to see her put me in my place for good. "Of course," she added with false generosity, "we will cover all the expenses for the move and the first month at the new residence." The silence that followed was thick. All eyes turned to me, waiting for my reaction. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity, and a few complicity with Tiffany. I rose slowly from my chair, feeling every eye in the room follow me. When I finally spoke, my voice was clear and calm. "Tiffany," I said, "I appreciate you gathering everyone here tonight because you're right. It is time for everyone to know exactly what the appropriate living arrangements are for each of us." I smiled, the same serene smile that had so confused her the first time. "But before we talk about where I should live, perhaps we should talk about where you are going to live." The silence that followed my words was absolute. It was as if someone had hit the pause button on a movie. Tiffany was staring at me with an expression of utter confusion, as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Michael had gone visibly pale. The guests were exchanging nervous glances, unsure if they were witnessing a family drama or the beginning of a mental breakdown. "Excuse me," Tiffany managed to articulate finally, her voice barely containing a tremor. "What do you mean? Where I am going to live?" I walked slowly to the head of the table where Tiffany normally sat when she was playing the role of the perfect hostess. I stopped there, my hands resting gently on the back of the chair, and I looked at each person in the room before I answered. "Well, Tiffany," I began, my voice maintaining that serene tone that so unnerved her. "Since we're talking about appropriate living arrangements and who belongs where, I thought this would be the perfect time to clear up a few misunderstandings about this beautiful house." Michael shot up from his chair. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I pulled an envelope from my purse, one I had carefully prepared that morning. Inside were copies of all the relevant documents arranged chronologically to tell the whole story. "Michael, when you and Tiffany bought this house 3 years ago, do you remember how much you paid for the down payment?" Michael frowned. "Why? And where did that money come from?" We. Michael looked at Tiffany, who was looking increasingly alarmed. "Tiffany said her family had loaned us the money." Tiffany stood up so quickly her chair almost tipped over. "Michael, I don't think it's appropriate to discuss our private finances in front of—" "Oh, but Tiffany," I interrupted gently, "you were the one who insisted this conversation be held in front of witnesses. You said it was important for everyone to understand the appropriate arrangements." I smiled. I'm simply following your lead. I drew the first document from the envelope. This is a bank record showing a transfer of $200,000 from an account under the name of Grace Romano to the joint account of Michael and Tiffany Miller dated exactly 3 days before the purchase of this house. A murmur went through the room. Brenda Peterson leaned forward, clearly interested. Susan brought a hand to her mouth. Mom, Michael whispered. You gave us the money for the down payment. I didn't give it to you, Michael. I loaned it to you. No interest, no due date because you are my son and I believed that one day when you were able, you would pay me back. I pulled out another document. But as it turns out, there's more. Tiffany had lost all the color in her face. Michael, you don't have to listen to this. She's trying to manipulate you. This document, I continued, ignoring Tiffany completely, shows the monthly mortgage payments on this house for the past 3 years. You will see that each month 2 payments are made. One for $1,200 which comes from Michael and Tiffany's account and another for $2,300 which comes from my personal account. Michael's cousin Kevin let out a low whistle. It means, I said clearly, that I have been paying 65% of the mortgage on this house for 3 years. All while I watched my daughter-in-law treat me like an embarrassing burden to the family. Michael sank heavily back into his chair. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I hoped that eventually you would realize something didn't add up. Because I hoped that at some point you would ask yourself how a woman on a small pension could constantly help you with financial emergencies. My voice hardened slightly. Because I hoped my own son would defend me when his wife humiliated me without needing me to reveal that I was the one keeping a roof over their heads. Tiffany finally found her voice, but it came out as a high-pitched shriek. This is ridiculous, Michael. She's lying. Those documents could be forged. I pulled another paper from the envelope. This is the official property deed for this house. Updated last week. As you will see, the name of the owner is no longer Michael and Tiffany Miller. I handed the document to Brenda Peterson, who had experience reading legal documents from her husband's business. Her eyes widened as she read. According to this document, Brenda announced in a clear voice, the legal owner of this property is Grace Romano. The chaos that followed was immediate. Sarah gasped. Susan started to cry. Kevin began firing off rapid questions that no one answered, but my attention was focused entirely on Michael and Tiffany. Michael was looking at me as if he'd never seen me before. Mom, how is this possible? It's possible, Michael, because your father was a very smart man who taught me how to be strategic with money. It's possible because when he died, he left me a portfolio of investments and properties that most people never knew existed. I paused. And it's possible because for the last 3 years, while your wife was treating me like dirt, I was making legal decisions to protect my interests. Tiffany had started to tremble visibly. Michael, you have to do something. She can't do this. We live here. We have rights. Rights. I repeated. And for the first time that night, my voice carried an edge of steel. What rights exactly, Tiffany? The right to humiliate me in my own house? The right to tell people I'm a burden to my family while I was paying your bills? The right to plan my exile to a retirement home while you lived in a property that I financed? I walked to where she stood, trembling by the window. Tell me, Tiffany, when you told me to eat in the kitchen like hired help, did you know you were speaking to the owner of the house? I didn't know, she stammered. No, I agreed. You didn't know. Because you were so busy looking down on me, so certain that I was nothing more than a useless old woman that you never bothered to ask yourself why your life was so comfortable. You never asked where the money was really coming from. I addressed the entire room. I want everyone to understand something. For 3 years I watched this woman systematically alienate my son from me. I listened to her tell him I was a liability, that my presence was an embarrassment to her social circle. I endured cruel comments about my clothes, my apartment, my supposed poverty, and the entire time I was funding the luxury lifestyle she enjoyed. Michael finally spoke, his voice cracking. Mom, why didn't you tell me the truth? Because I needed to know who the woman you chose as a wife really was. I needed to see if the love you claimed to have for me was genuine, or if it only existed when you thought you needed me. My eyes filled with tears, but my voice remained steady. And unfortunately, Michael, I got my answer. Tiffany suddenly turned on Michael, grabbing his arm desperately. Michael, you have to believe me. If I had known, if I had understood, I never would have. Never would have. What, Tiffany? I interrupted. Never would have treated me like garbage? Does that mean your respect only exists when people have money? That your love for my son was conditional on keeping me away from you? Michael pulled free from Tiffany's grasp and walked toward me.
Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
I didn't know. You knew, Michael, I said softly. Maybe you didn't know the financial details, but you knew your wife was treating me badly. You knew she was systematically excluding me from your life, and you chose to let it happen because it was easier than confronting her. The silence that followed was devastating. Everyone in the room could feel the weight of the choices that had led to this moment. Finally, I pulled the last document from my envelope. This is a 30-day eviction notice. It's dated for today. For Tiffany let out a choked cry. You can't do this. Michael, do something. I looked at my son, this 35-year-old man who was once my little boy, and I felt a mix of love and disappointment I had never experienced before. Michael, I said, you have a choice to make, and it has to be your choice, not hers. The 30 days that followed that dinner were the longest and yet the most liberating of my life. Michael didn't speak to me for the first week. Tiffany, of course, had gone into full panic mode, making frantic calls to lawyers, to her family, to anyone who might help her find a legal loophole to stop the eviction. But Marcus had done his job perfectly. There was no legal escape. 5. What I didn't expect was the reaction from the rest of the family and Tiffany's social circle. Brenda Peterson called me the day after the dinner. Grace, she said. I have to admit, that was the most satisfying revelation I have ever witnessed. That woman had been bad-mouthing you for months, telling everyone you were a drain on Michael. And now? I asked. Now everyone is talking about how a woman could be so stupid as to mistreat the person who was bankrolling her. Brenda laughed. Honey, you're the talk of the town. My sister Susan was different. She came to visit 3 days later, her eyes puffy from crying. Grace, I didn't know any of this, she said, sinking into my sofa as she had thousands of times over our lives. If I had known you were financing everything. You would have done what, Susan? I asked gently. Would you have told Michael his wife was mistreating me? Because you didn't need to know about the money to see how Tiffany treated me. Susan was quiet for a long moment. You're right, she admitted finally. I just thought it was, normal mother-in-law and daughter-in-law friction. I didn't realize how cruel she was being. That's the thing about emotional abuse, Susan. People prefer not to see it because it's uncomfortable to confront. A week before the eviction notice was up, Michael finally appeared at my door. He looked terrible. He had lost weight. He had deep circles under his eyes and his hands trembled slightly as he handed me a cup of coffee he had brought from my favorite cafe. Mom, he began, his voice hoarse. I need you to know that I've spent these past 2 weeks replaying everything. Every conversation, every time Tiffany made a comment about you, every time I failed to defend you. And, I asked, keeping my tone neutral. And I realized you're right. I knew. Maybe I didn't know the financial details, but I knew something was wrong. I knew Tiffany was hurting you and I chose to look the other way because it was easier. He stopped, struggling with the words. Because I thought if I kept her happy, if I did what she wanted, everything would be okay. But it was never okay, was it? Because every time I gave in on something related to you, she just demanded more. Michael, I said softly, are you apologizing because you feel what you did was wrong or because you now know that I have money? The question hit him like a slap, his eyes filled with tears. I deserve that, he whispered. I deserve for you to question my motives. It's not about what you deserve, son. It's about me needing to know if you've learned anything real from this or if you're just scared of the consequences. Michael broke then. He began to cry in a way he hadn't since he was a small child. I'm sorry, Mom. I am so sorry. Not for the money, not for the house. I'm sorry for losing you. I'm sorry for letting her treat you that way. I'm sorry for not being the son you deserved. It was what I had been waiting to hear. But my heart still felt heavy. And Tiffany? Tiffany left 3 days ago. Left. She packed her things and moved in with her parents. But before she left, she said something that opened my eyes completely. Michael took a shaky sip of coffee. She told me that if I chose to side with you, if I chose your money over her, then she couldn't be with someone so weak. And what did you say to her? I told her she was wrong. That I wasn't choosing your money. I was choosing my mother, the woman who raised me, who supported me, who was there for me my entire life, even when I wasn't there for her. Michael leaned forward, taking my hands in his. Mom, I know it might be too late. I know I might have damaged our relationship so much it can't be fixed, but I want to try. I want to be the son I should have always been. I looked at this man, my son, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. I saw the Michael I knew before Tiffany. The Michael who used to defend me on the playground when other kids made fun of my last name. The Michael who brought me wildflowers on Mother's Day because he knew I liked them more than expensive roses. Michael, I said finally, when your father died, he made me promise I would always take care of you. But somewhere along the way, I confused taking care of you with enabling other people to control you. I made mistakes too. But you never stopped loving me, he said. Even when I didn't deserve it. That's what mothers do, Michael. We love unconditionally. But respect has to be earned. 3 days later, Michael moved out of the house. Not because I asked him to, but because he decided he needed time to reflect on who he wanted to be. He found a small apartment near his work and began living on his own means for the first time in years. I, on the other hand, made a decision that surprised even myself. I decided to move into the house in Hinsdale. After years of living in a small apartment pretending to have less than I did. It was time to live openly as the woman I truly was. The first night in the house, as I sat in the living room that had been the stage for so many humiliations, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine peace. There was no one criticizing my clothes, my decisions, or my existence. There was no one making snide comments about my age, or my socioeconomic level. It was just me in my own house living my own life. Brenda Peterson became a regular visitor, and slowly I began to rebuild social connections I had let languish during the years. I focused on being the perfect mother and mother-in-law. It turns out when a 63-year-old woman lives unapologetically as herself, she attracts people who value her for those very reasons. Michael began visiting on Sundays. At first, our conversations were careful, formal, but gradually we began to rebuild trust. He never asked me for money, never assumed I would cover his expenses. Instead, he started taking me out to small restaurants he could afford, going for walks in the park, doing the simple things we had stopped doing years ago. One Sunday, 6 months after the eviction, Michael arrived with a nervous expression. Mom, he said, I want to ask you something, but you need to know it's okay if you say no. What is it? I've been going to therapy, trying to understand how I let things get so far. And my therapist suggested I ask you if you would be willing to come to a session with me so we can talk about everything that happened with a professional's help. The request surprised me, but it also filled me with hope. Why do you want to do that, Michael? Because I want to rebuild our relationship the right way. I want to understand how we got to that point, and I want to make sure it never happens again. He paused. And because I love my mother and I want her to know her son is worth the effort of healing this relationship. That night after Michael left, I sat in my backyard, the same yard where Tiffany had planned so many of her humiliations. And I realized something. For all those years of mistreatment, I had been waiting for someone else to rescue me. I had waited for Michael to defend me, for the family to see the truth, for Tiffany to miraculously change. But in the end, the only person who could rescue me was myself. And in doing so, I hadn't just reclaimed my dignity and my home. I had taught my son a lesson that no amount of money could ever buy. That respect isn't begged for, it's commanded. That true love doesn't require you to make yourself small so others can feel big. And that it is never too late to choose peace over toxicity. Now when I look at myself in the mirror each morning in my own home, I see a woman who finally knows her worth. A woman who doesn't need anyone's approval to live with dignity. A free woman. And that freedom, after all these years, tastes exactly as sweet as I had dreamed it.